Before we saturate this sector with pure warp-born madness, hit surrender on your hesitation, carve your mark into the data stream, and trigger the hype protocols. Let the galaxy choke on our excess. In the grim darkness of the far future, even perfection exacts a brutal price. Once there existed a legion of superhuman warriors so proud, so pure in purpose, that they alone bore the Emperor's very name upon their armor. They were his chosen sons, the Emperor's children, radiant examples of everything the Imperium claimed to stand for. Noble, fearless, completely devoted. They looked like the ideal of what a space marine should be. What could possibly go wrong? As it happens, quite a lot. This is the story of Slaaneish's so-called perfect warriors, tale of splendor, fixation, treachery, and a nightmare plunge into unrestrained excess. From the summit of honor to the abyss of depravity, we'll uncover who the Emperor's children were, how they rose, and how they fell into becoming the warped champions of chaos we know today. A cautionary epic, written in bolter fire, and the screams of the damned. Prepare yourself for the rise and fall of the Emperor's children. Our journey begins as many do on holy terror in an age of conquest and hope when the warriors of the Third Legion stood proud and uncorrupted. And it ends well. It ends in a place far darker than anyone could have imagined. Steel your soul and open your mind. The saga of Fulgrim and his Emperor's children is about to unfold. Founding and early history. The origins of the Emperor's Children Legion date back to the twilight of Old Terra during the final days of the Unification Wars. Initially known simply as the Third Legion, they were formed from the gene seed of one of the 20 Primarchs. In those brutal days, the Emperor conquered the techno-barbarian states of Earth and forged the first Space Marine legions. For the Third Legion, recruits were drawn from among Terrara's finest youth. In fact, many came from the defeated nobility of Europa, aristocratic houses that, having bent the knee to the Emperor, offered up their best and brightest children as a sign of fealty. It's said that House Lois of Comorg even surrendered all its sons to the Emperor's gene forges after their capitulation. Thus, from the start, the Third Legion's recruits were of distinguished pedigree. They were raised to be exemplars of honor, discipline, and martial excellence, to atone for the sins of their forebears. Even before their Primarch was found, the Emperor's children displayed a streak of perfectionism. They drilled to exacting standards, and unusually, they worked closely with the Proto-Imperial army in campaigns. While some legions looked down on commanding ordinary human soldiers, the Third Legion embraced it. They were known to lead by example in battle and to fight with the Imperial army, coordinating strategies rather than shunning allied troops. This earned them a reputation as noble paragons and effective diplomats. They carried themselves with a cultured, civilized air, not often seen in those savage times. The Third Legion even adopted a proud color scheme, royal purple and gleaming gold, and acted as the Emperor's honor guard, or envoys on several occasions. Yet, for all their promise, tragedy struck the Third Legion early on. A plot by insurgents on Luna, the so-called Selenite cults, managed to sabotage the Legion's gene seed stalks on Terra. This contagion became known as the Blight. Vital organs and implants of new Marines began to fail, and the Legion's growth was suddenly stunted. Precious gene seed that should have raised new battle brothers was lost. The Emperor's gene scientists and apothecaries rushed to contain the disaster. Infected implants were isolated and destroyed. The fallen Marine's own progenoid glands, salvaged in hopes of preserving usable gene seed. Thanks to these desperate measures, the Blight was eventually purged, but the damage was done. The once promising Third Legion was left devastated, reduced to only a few hundred arters. While other Space Marine legions swelled to tens of thousands strong, the Emperor's children numbered barely a few companies' worth. By the time the Great Crusade was in full swing, the proud Third Legion was one of the smallest forces in the Emperor's arsenal. Some in the Imperium whispered that the Legion's name still officially just the 3rd Legion at that point, might soon be struck from the rolls altogether if they could not be rebuilt. But the Emperor was not willing to abandon his prized son. He ordered the remaining Emperor's children to continue fighting, often attached to larger legions as an elite vanguard. In particular, the 3rd Legion fought alongside the Lunar Wolves, the 16th Legion, led by the famed Horus. This was a fortuitous assignment. Under the Warm Master Horus's mentorship, the shrunken 3rd Legion gained invaluable combat experience and forged bonds of brotherhood with the most victorious legion of the Crusade. Horus took the noble but under-strength 3rd Legion under his wing, and their warriors learned much serving beside the Lunar Wolves. Horus himself grew fond of them, and their Primarch, once he was found, would become one of Horus's closest friends, the Phoenician Risers. Every Space Marine Legion was created with a Primarch, a Gene Father in mind. The 3rd Legion's patron was one of the 20 infant Primarchs, who had been cast to the stars by dark chaos treachery long ago. While the Emperor's armies crusaded outward, they gradually recovered these lost demigod generals one by one. For the 3rd Legion, salvation arrived on a distant world named Kimos. It was on Kimos that the Emperor finally found the Primarch Fulgrim, who would come to be called the Phoenician. Fulgrim's upbringing on Kimos was a tale of triumph against adversity. Kimos was a bleak, dying mining planet, starved of resources and hope. The people survived in fortress factories, eking out a living by recycling scrap and chemical runoff. It was into this gray industrial wasteland that baby Fulgrim fell from the sky. According to the legend, the laborers who came to inspect a meteor strike did not find a lump of rock at the crater's heart, but a flawless infant boy lying amid the smoke and shattered earth. This was the Primarch's arrival, and with it, so the stories claim, a fresh spring burst from the barren ground, water welling where there had been only dust. The workers took the child in and named him Fulgrim, after a figure in their old tales who had once brought water and life to a dying land. From the very start, Fulgrim was described as impossibly beautiful, radiant in aspect and gifted beyond reason. Though he was something far more than human living among ordinary men, he grew up humble, working alongside the people of Kimos in their factories. It did not last. In mind and skill, he rapidly surpassed every adult around him. By the age of 15, he had risen from common laborer to one of the leading figures of his city. Fulgrim quickly understood that Kimos was sliding toward extinction. Its resources were nearly exhausted. The world trudged along a slow path to death. He refused to accept that fate. With burning charisma and iron will, he reorganized the factory settlements, increased efficiency, and led expeditions into long-abandoned mines to reclaim ancient machinery. Under Fulgrim's guidance, Kimos began producing a surplus for the first time in living memory. He did not stop at simple survival. As material security returned, Fulgrim drove the rebirth of art, culture, and beauty on Kimos. The grim, purely utilitarian existence of the past was slowly replaced with hope, color, and creativity. By the time the Emperor arrived on Kimos, around 50 standard years after Fulgrim's descent, the once dying planet had been utterly remade. Fulgrim now ruled it alone, the savior of Kimos, who had dragged his world out of ruin into a new golden age. One can easily picture the moment when the Emperor of Mankind descended from the void to meet this prodigious son. Often the tall, armored figure of the Master of Mankind strode into Fulgrim's court at Calyx, flanked by gilded warriors. Fulgrim understood immediately who stood before him. The Primarch knelt at once and offered himself to the Great Crusade without hesitation. In that instant, father and son were reunited. The Emperor spoke to Fulgrim of Terra, of humanity's vast destiny among the stars, and of the legion of superhuman warriors that awaited their Gene Sire's command. Fulgrim journeyed to Terra to meet this new family, the warriors of the 3rd Legion, crafted from his own genetic template. What he found could have crushed a lesser soul. Only 200 Astartes remained, a pitiful shard of a legion that should have numbered in the thousands. Fulgrim, however, was not dismayed. In a famous moment repeated in Imperial chronicles, he addressed his mere 200 space marines and delivered a speech so passionate and sincere that it moved even the Emperor. Fulgrim proclaimed that though they were few, they would bear the Emperor's light across the stars. "We are his children," he told them, "and through our deeds, the galaxy shall know his wisdom and glory." In Fulgrim's eyes burned absolute devotion to the Emperor and an unshakable pride in what his legion represented. The Emperor was deeply impressed. Stirred by Fulgrim's words and the Third's indomitable spirit, he granted them a unique honor, the right to wear the Palatine Aquila, the double-headed eagle of the Imperium and the Emperor's own personal sigil, upon their breastplates. No other legion at the time bore this distinction. To seal Fulgrim's vow, the Emperor formally granted the Third Legion a new title, the Emperor's Children. They alone would carry the Emperor's name as their own, a constant reminder of the perfection they aspired to embody. For a legion that had come so close to oblivion, this was a moment of immense pride and vindication. The Emperor's Children took to the stars with renewed fervor, determined to prove worthy of the master of mankind's faith in them. Perfection in all things. Under Fulgrim's command, the Emperor's Children Legion expanded rapidly in strength, glory, and reputation. Fulgrim wasted no time in rebuilding his legion. From those scant 200 warriors, Chimers itself became a recruiting world. Its hardy, disciplined populace provided excellent initiates, and new gene seed from the Emperor's vaults was used to replenish what had been lost. Though the Emperor's Children would always be one of the smaller legions, even at their peak, they were far fewer in number than legions like the Ultramarines or Imperial Fists. They more than made up for it with sheer quality. Fulgrim drilled his Marines relentlessly. They were to be the best, the most skilled fighters, the most cultured thinkers, exemplars in every aspect. Nothing less than perfection would satisfy the Phoenician. During the Great Crusade, that epic campaign to reunite humanity's lost colonies, the Emperor's Children gained renown for their discipline, skill, and pursuit of excellence. They fought with a precision and artistry that impressed their brother legions. Every battle was in a sense a performance to be perfected. When the Emperor's Children liberated a world, they often went further than just achieving military victory. They sought to civilize and improve. They built grand monuments and infrastructure, leaving planets better than they found them. In one notable instance, Fulgrim's warriors constructed the so-called perfect fortress on the world of Nars. This was more than a fortress. It was a beautifully designed city of marble colonnades, gardens, and soaring arches, yet ingeniously fortified such that every decorative balustrade doubled as a clever firing position, and every boulevard could become a kill zone. It was said that nothing in that city was out of place. Beauty and function were in perfect balance. The Emperor's Children took enormous pride in such accomplishments. They saw themselves not just as conquerors, but as exemplars of imperial civilization, bringing glory and refinement to humanity's new empire. Fulgrim's personal quest for perfection rubbed off on all his sons. They became connoisseurs of the finer things. While on campaign, they collected artisans and remembrances, imperial historians and artists to chronicle and adorn their victories. Painting, sculpture, poetry, music, these were all encouraged among the legion's ranks. Many emperors, children warriors became quite cultured, studying philosophy and the arts when off the battlefield. This was not mere vanity. They believed that to serve the emperor to the fullest, one should aspire to excellence in all endeavors, both martial and intellectual. Other legions sometimes teased them for their fastidiousness or their love of finery, but none could deny the results. The Third Legion won laurel after laurel in the Crusades' early decades. They fought with distinction alongside the Lunar Wolves and others, and as their numbers grew, they undertook independent campaigns that became exemplars of swift, decisive compliance. Through all this, Fulgrim remained intensely proud of his legion, perhaps too proud. His close friendship with Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, the Gorgon, was legendary. The two Primarchs bonded over their shared love of craftsmanship. Fulgrim and Ferrus even forged magnificent weapons for one another as tokens of respect. Fulgrim crafted a thunder hammer for Ferrus Manus, and Ferrus forged a glittering sword for Fulgrim. Their brotherhood was strong, but it also reinforced Fulgrim's self-image as a peerless artisan and warrior. In Fulgrim's eyes, the Emperor's children truly were the glittering example for all legions over time. This absolute confidence in his path, this pride grew and grew. Fulgrim pushed his warriors harder and harder to eliminate any flaw or weakness. Imperfection was the only real sin in the Phoenicians' eyes. It's here that the first shadows of what was to come might be discerned. The Emperor's children sought perfection in all things, but perfection is an impossible goal. The more they achieved, the more pressure there was to maintain those heights and to push beyond them. An impossible standard began to weigh on Fulgrim and his legion. They became fiercely competitive, driven to outdo all others, and even themselves. While outwardly everything was golden, great victories, compliance after compliance achieved, honors from the Emperor, underneath a subtle rot was setting in. The rot of hubris. Fulgrim would never admit failure, nor would his sons. If something was imperfect, they would either hide it or obsessively correct it. Mistakes became unacceptable, weaknesses intolerable. The Emperor's children began to feel they had to prove themselves constantly, both because of their small size and because they alone bore the Emperor's name. By the midpoint of the Great Crusade, the Emperor's children were admired by many, even as some whispered that their pursuit of perfection was too zealous. Fulgrim in particular had a flair for the dramatic and a pride that bordered on arrogance. Still, none could have foreseen the disaster ahead. The legion that seemed to have everything, honor, glory, favor, was about to have its foundations shattered in the most horrifying way. The corruption unseen. The fall of the Emperor's children did not happen overnight. The seeds of corruption were planted subtly, and at first no one realized what was happening. The turning point came during a campaign against a Xenos species called the Leia. The Leia inhabited a tropical ocean world, and they were a decadent technicolored species of serpentine aliens. Xenos though they were, the Leia had raised temples and artworks in worship of dark gods of pleasure. Though the Imperials didn't yet recognize the signs, Fulgrim led the 28th Expeditionary Fleet, including many Emperor's children, to exterminate the Leia as part of the crusade. During the fierce battles across the Carl-built temples of the Leia, Fulgrim achieved a feat that would resonate through his destiny. In the depths of a great temple, amidst slithering Leia champions and hallucinatory incense, Fulgrim personally slew a mighty Leia champion and claimed a wondrous sword as a trophy. This sword was exquisitely forged, alien but beautiful with a strange serpent motif. Unbeknownst to Fulgrim, this weapon was far from a mere blade. It was a chaos, tainted artifact, a repository of something truly sinister. From the moment Fulgrim picked up the Leian sword, fate took a dark turn. The blade was imbued with the essence of a demon of Slanishes, one of the chaos gods of excess and pleasure, invisible, insidious. That demonic presence began whispering to Fulgrim's mind. Not in obvious ways at first. There were no sudden drastic changes. Fulgrim returned victorious from Leia, laurels on his brow, the strange sword in his hand, and none of his brothers or sons saw anything amiss. But gradually that whisper took root. It amplified Fulgrim's pride, nudging his desires. "You are great," it whispered. "You could be even greater. Why be bound by the limits of the Imperium? What is the Emperor keeping from you?" Subtle poison, drop by drop, entered the Primarch's soul. Around this time, the galaxy itself was becoming a more perilous place. Dissent was brewing among the Primarchs. Warm Master Horus, once the Emperor's most trusted son, had been wounded on the moon of Davenin and fallen under the influence of chaos. Horus secretly began to sow the seeds of rebellion against the emperor. When Fulgrim received word of peculiar happenings involving Horus, he became concerned. In fact, Fulgrim was so loyal that he rushed to meet Horus face to face, hoping to reason with his old friend and mentor. But Horus, now seduced by chaos, had other plans. In that fateful meeting, Horus managed to sway Fulgrim to his side. He appealed to Fulgrim's ego and his frustrations. The War Master flattered the Phoenician, telling him the emperor no longer appreciated their perfection, that the Imperium was stagnating, that together they could reform it. Under normal circumstances, Fulgrim might have rejected such treasonous talk, but the constant whispers of the Len Demon Blade had weakened his certainty. Fulgrim heard Horus out, doubt and ambition gnawing at him. At some point, the scales tipped. Fulgrim decided that Horus's vision, or perhaps simply Horus's friendship, mattered more than blind loyalty to a distant emperor, who, in Fulgrim's view, didn't seem to value perfection as he claimed. Thus Fulgrim and the emperor's children turned from the emperor's light. It was done in secrecy at first. Only the highest officers knew they were siding with Horus, but the corruption spread quickly. Fulgrim's closest lord commanders, men like Eidolon, Julius Caesaron, Lucius and others were quick to embrace their Primarch's decision. Some out of loyalty to him, some out of their own burgeoning thirst for power and indulgence. Plans were made to eliminate any who would refuse the coming betrayal. In truth, very few emperor's children stayed loyal to the emperor once Fulgrim convinced them to join Horus. The legion's pride in their Primarch and their self-image as chosen ones made them particularly susceptible to the idea that they knew better than the distant emperor what path was right. Only a handful of dissenters remained, their loyalty to the emperor unshaken, and they were forced into hiding among their brothers, wary and confused by the strange new attitudes taking hold. As Horus's grand heresy began, the emperor's children stood among the first traitors. The opening move of the Horus heresy was an event called the XIV atrocity, and the emperor's children played a key role in it. Horus, needing to get rid of any loyalists within the ranks of his traitor legions, devised a cruel purge. Elements of several legions, those still believed loyal, were deployed to the surface of the hive world XIV, 3 under the pretense of quelling a rebellion. Among the forces sent down were companies from the emperor's children, who were not in the know about Horus's betrayal. Loyal officers like Captain Saul Tarvitz and Captain Solomon Demeter found themselves leading troops on XIV 3, unaware that their own comrades now considered them expendable. When the traitor plan was sprung, it was horrific. Horus virus bombed the entire planet, XIV 3 from orbit, intending to kill all the loyal Marines on the surface in one treacherous stroke. A lethal bioagent spread across the world, slaughtering human populaces in minutes and turning cities into toxic graveyards, thanks only to quick thinking and a few warnings. Some Space Marines survived the initial bombardment by sealing themselves in bunkers. Captain Saul Tarvitz was one of these heroes. He had pieced together suspicious clues and stolen a Thunderhawk gunship to warn as many on the ground as possible just before the bombs fell. Thanks to Tarvitz's warning, pockets of loyalists from the Emperor's children, as well as the sons of Horus, Lunar Wolves, World Eaters, and Death God, managed to find shelter and endure the virus bomb. But their situation was dire. Their former brothers in orbit now moved to finish the job with fire. Horus ordered the fleet to launch an intense orbital bombardment, the infamous Firestorm. To scour XIV, 3 of any survivors' entire cityscapes were emulated. By sheer grit and luck, a few loyalist artists still survived even that hell, taking refuge in underground shelters and sealed chambers. Refusing to die quietly, these loyalists emerged into the burning ruins and prepared to sell their lives dearly. On XIV 3, loyalist emperor's children clashed with their treacherous brothers in brutal fratricidal combat. Captain Saul Tarvitz rallied the survivors, amid the shattered remains of the planet's capital, the Coral City. Among those who initially stood beside him was his friend, the famed swordsman Lucius. Lucius was a gifted officer of the Emperor's Children, renowned for his mastery of the blade and notorious for his vanity. Tarvets trusted him. Together they and warriors from multiple legions held off wave after wave of assaults as the traitor forces descended to hunt them down. But as the fighting dragged on, jealousy and spite festered in Lucius's heart. He grew resentful that Tarvets was receiving praise and recognition for leading the defense. Lucius believed he should be hailed as the hero. Poisoned by envy, he chose betrayal. In secret, Lucius contacted Lord Commander Eidolon, offering his renewed allegiance to Fulgrim and Horus in exchange for pardon. Then, in the chaos of a skirmish, Lucius turned his blade not on the enemy, but on his fellow loyalists. It is said he personally butchered numerous brothers who had once fought at his side, all to prove his dedication to the War Master's cause. This atrocity earned him readmission into the Emperor's Children, an obscene twist, given that loyalty and brotherhood had once defined the Legion. Despite such heartbreaking treachery and impossible odds, Tarvets and the remaining loyalists fought on with unshaken courage. Battles raged for days through the ash-choked, corpse-littered streets of XIV Legion, but the outcome had been doomed from the beginning. In the end, the traitor commanders, tired of hunting down the last defenders, simply withdrew to orbit and unleashed an even more savage bombardment. The Coral City and its surroundings were reduced to cratered ruin. Tarvets and his final warriors died in those last apocalyptic barrages, martyrs to a loyalty the Emperor himself would not learn of until much later. The XIV Legion betrayal had achieved its grim purpose. The Emperor's Children, along with the 3 other legions involved, had purged their remaining loyal elements. Those few Emperor's Children who stayed true to the Emperor perished with Tarvets, save perhaps a scattered handful who might have been captured or disappeared into hiding. Now Fulgrim's legion stood united in treason, and their plunge into chaos only accelerated.
Return in the Emperor's Children's fall. It was likely in the aftermath of XIV III. Freed from any lingering conscience or restraint, the Legion hurled itself into depravity. Fulgrim, ever the perfectionist, now chased ever greater extremes of sensation and experience, unshackled from imperial law and decency. The whispers of the demonic entity bound within his blade grew louder, and Fulgrim listened. The Legion's culture twisted into something monstrous. Where once the Emperor's Children cherished art and music, these now became perverted into tools of indulgence and sadistic excess. Where once they had prided themselves on pushing their limits, now they drove themselves into lunacy. In the months following the opening acts of the heresy, the 28th Expedition Fleet of the Emperor's Children staged an event that would enter history as a byword for corruption. The Grand Symphony of Pain aboard Fulgrim's flagship, an atrocity later whispered of as the Maravillia, the music of the damned. On the mighty battleship Pride of the Emperor, Fulgrim's personal vessel, a spectacle of unrivaled decadence unfolded. Remember the remembrances, the artists, poets and performers who traveled with the great crusade fleets. Fulgrim had gathered many such souls into his orbit. One such individual was a composer from Terra named Bikua Kinska. She was a brilliant but jaded musician, always searching for new sounds and experiences to inspire her art. On the world of Lerin, Kinska had accompanied the Legion into one of those Slenacy temples and had been subtly corrupted by what she witnessed. The alien sights and sounds of excess filled with feverish inspiration. Kinska wrote an ambitious new piece of music intended to capture the truth she had felt in that temple. She named this composition the Maravillia, meaning the wonder or marvel. It was to be an extravagant operatic performance, involving unusual instruments, discordant harmonies, and a full choir. Fulgrim, increasingly prone to extreme indulgences, approved a ship-wide performance. The stage was set in the La Finish Theatre aboard Pride of the Emperor. Hundreds of legionaries and crew packed the hall, curious and excited for this unique concert. Imagine the scene. Great luminaries of music, tuning bizarre custom-built instruments. The air thick with narcotic incense. Artist warriors in their ornate purple and gold armor, sitting alongside elegantly dressed remembrances and ship's officers. This was to be no ordinary recital. It was promised to be an assault on the senses like no other. And so it was in the most horrific way imaginable. When the Maravilha began, its notes were laced with sorcery. Kinska, knowingly or not, had crafted certain instruments to produce frequencies that resonated with warp energy, knowledge she'd gleaned from the Leia Temple. As the orchestra and choir performed, the cacophony built into a maddening wall of sound. The music assaulted the listeners with waves of emotion and sensation beyond mortal experience. Otherworldly harmonics echoed in the halls. Many in the audience became disoriented, then entranced. The sound acted like a summons. A ritualistic call to the warped reality itself began to weaken under the sonic onslaught. Some listeners felt euphoric ecstasy. Others felt stabbing pain. Many felt both mingled in an indistinguishable flood. Then all at once, all hell broke loose. Literally, the Maravilha reached a crescendo and tore open a psychic rift. From the immaterium, demons of Slaanesh slithered and leapt into reality. Drawn by the erratic energies pulsing through the audience, these clawed sheevils fell upon the stunned crowd. Amid the deafening music, the theater erupted into violence and debauchery. Legionaries and humans alike, their minds undone by Slaanesh's touch, turned on each other in a frenzy of lust and bloodlust. Some audience members began ripping off their own flesh, or that of their neighbors, laughing deliriously as they did so. Others engaged in acts of violent passion. The distinction between pleasure and pain obliterated the Emperor's children, so used to perfect discipline, now completely lost themselves to a kaleidoscope of sensation. As musicians died at their instruments, torn apart by demons or crazed audience members, some artists rushed onto the stage to keep the music going. In their unholy fervor, these Marines took up the strange instruments and played despite no training. In doing so, they discovered that the devices could project waves of destructive sonic force powered by the warp itself. Thus, in the middle of this nightmare concert, the first Noise Marines were born. These Marines, drunk on sensation, used sonic weapons, the repurposed instruments, to blast apart those around them, all while feeding the infernal energy of the ritual. Eventually, the sound reached such a pitch that reality itself couldn't bear it. 6 demons emerged and possessed members of the choir, their shrieking voices now quite literally demonic. This cacophonic horror only ended when the entire theater was nearly destroyed by the tumult, and many participants lay dead or mutated beyond recognition. Bokinska herself was slain by a demonette, her soul supposedly devoured with a smile on her lips. When it was over, those Emperor's children who survived found themselves changed. They had tasted the ultimate excess, been pushed past the boundaries of sanity, and for many, it was the most exhilarating thing they'd ever experienced. They wanted more. Fulgrim and his legion had willingly given themselves over, body and soul, to the Prince of Pleasure, Slaanesh. The Maravilha was the Emperor's children's point of no return, where their quest for perfection twisted into a doomed quest for ever-escalating sensation. The legion that emerged from Lafinich was no longer composed of noble warriors and cultured conquerors. They had become the lords of pleasure, servants of Slaanesh in all her decadent glory. New units called the Cacophony, the cacophonous ones, were formed. Marines outfitted with those sonic weapons to bring the gift of agonizing music to the battlefield. To any sane observer, the Emperor's children had gone utterly insane. To the Emperor's children themselves, they had finally broken every limit and inhibition, and it was glorious. One can almost hear the echo of that diabolical concert in every atrocity the Legion would later commit. It was said that as the pride of the Emperor sailed on, eerie strains of unearthly music sometimes still echoed through its corridors, a reminder that the Legion's very soul had been rewritten in that orgy of noise and death. So much for a classy night at the opera. The Horus heresy, brother against brother. With their full descent into chaos well underway, the Emperor's children took their place in Horus's grand rebellion. The next major confrontation of the heresy was the drop site massacre on XIV V, one of the most infamous battles in galactic history. Here Fulgrim and his Emperor's children would come face to face with old friends and deliver mortal wounds that could never be undone. On XIV V, 7 legions of space marines clashed in a trap of unprecedented scale. Horus had dug in with his openly declared traitor legions, sons of Horus, Emperor's children, World Eaters, and Death Guard. After XIV III, in response, the Empyrean dispatched 7 other legions to punish the rebels. The first wave to hit the Nurgle depression on XIV V's surface were 3 loyalist legions. The Iron Hands led by Primarch Ferrus Mannerus, the Salamanders led by Vulcan, and the Raven Guard led by Corvus Corax. They landed amid brutal fighting, neither side yet realizing a second betrayal was imminent. Fulgrim and the Emperor's children, fighting alongside Horus's forces, feigned resistance as this loyalist vanguard attacked. For a time the battle was evenly matched. The Iron Hands and their allies fought bravely, even pushing into the traitor lines at great cost. Ferrus Manus in particular drove deep, determined to find Fulgrim and confront him directly. However, when the second wave of supposed reinforcement legions
arrived from orbit, the trap was sprung. These new arrivals, 4 legions led by Primarchs, who had secretly sided with Horus, the Night Lords, Iron Warriors, Alpha Legion, and Word-Bearers, did not come to aid the Loyalists. They came to join Horus. In an act of ultimate treachery, these reserves suddenly opened fire on the Loyalists from behind. In an instant, the 3 Loyalist legions on the ground were caught in a vice. Traitors in front of them, traitors now at their backs. The Loyalists' hope for victory was crushed under sheer numbers, and betrayal most foul. The drop site massacre had begun on the black sands of XIV V amidst a battle already soaked in fraternal blood. Fulgrim finally met Ferrus Manus in single combat. The Phoenician versus the Gorgon, brothers, friends, rivals. Ferrus was incandescent, with righteous fury at Fulgrim's betrayal. Once these two had been like the closest of siblings, crafting weapons together and extolling each other's talents. Now Ferrus saw only a madman who had dishonored them all. Amid the swirling melee of marines, the 2 Primarchs faced off. Ferrus Manus wielded a massive hammer, none other than Forge Breaker, the weapon Fulgrim had gifted him in better times. Fulgrim held not the elegant sword Ferrus had made for him. That blade had been shattered earlier in the heresy, so Fulgrim no longer bore it. Instead, he wielded the sinister, daemon-possessed Laker blade that had become his favored weapon. The duel that followed was both epic and tragic. Fulgrim fought like the consummate swordsman he was, swift, elegant, almost beautiful in motion. Ferrus Manus met him like a living battering ram, a juggernaut of raw strength and iron resolve. His hands literally forged from living metal, and his temper as unforgiving as the steel of his world. Blow after blow crashed between them, each impact shaking the very ground. Fulgrim's strikes were precise and refined, but Ferrus turned them aside with the unyielding power of his metal fists. When Ferrus struck back, it was with earth-shattering force, and for a time it seemed the Gorgon might win through sheer brutality and will. Astartes from both sides gave the dueling Primarchs a wide berth. It was like watching ancient gods at war, but Fulgrim carried an unholy advantage. The chaos entity bound within his sword lent him inhuman speed and strength whenever he needed it. At a crucial moment,
With Ferris worn down, bleeding from a dozen lesser wounds, the Gorgon raised his hammer for a killing blow. Empowered by the warp-spawned thing in his weapon, Fulgrim surged forward faster than Ferris anticipated. He caught the hammer stroke on the shrieking Laker blade, unnatural energy screaming along its length, then drove the sword deep into Ferris Minus's torso. The Primarch of the Iron Hands collapsed to one knee, mortally wounded, but not yet dead. Fulgrim stood over his fallen brother, Daemon's sword raised for the final strike, and in that instant, he faltered. For one blessed heartbeat, the Fulgrim of old seemed to awaken. In Ferris's agonized gaze, he saw not an enemy, but the brother he had loved. He saw the blood on his blade and realized, with a surge of horror, what he was about to do. Shame and regret crashed over him. He did not want to kill Ferris Minus. This was not how any of it was supposed to be. Perfection, the ideal he had chased all his life, had led him here to the brink of murdering one of the greatest among them. Fulgrim's soul screamed in remorse. He tried to stop, to lower the sword, but it was already too late. The daemon within the blade seized that moment of weakness. With a burst of otherworldly strength, it took control of Fulgrim's body and drove his hand to strike. In a single terrible swing, the silver blade sheared clean through Ferris Minus's neck. The Gorgon's head tumbled to the scorched ground. Ferris Minus died at the hands of his closest brother. A terrible quiet fell inside Fulgrim's mind as he stared at the ruin before him. The wider battle still thundered around them, but to Fulgrim it was as though time itself had frozen. Ferris's dead eyes condemned him far more loudly than words ever could. Fulgrim had not achieved perfection. He had committed the ultimate sin, the murder of his own kin. In that moment, all his triumphs, his pride, his rationalizations for rebellion crumbled. Overwhelmed by grief and self-hatred, Fulgrim longed for an end to the torment of what he had done. The daemon in the sword sensed his despair and pounced. If the Phoenician was so broken, it could offer him peace, oblivion, a way to escape the crushing guilt. All he had to do was let it in completely. In his shattered mental state, Fulgrim consented. In a heartbeat, the greater daemon bound within the blade flooded into his body and took full possession. The Primarch's own soul was shoved aside, trapped helplessly in a cage within his own mind. Symbolically, that prison took the form of a painting, a magnificent portrait of Fulgrim, crafted earlier by a remembrancer and given pride of place aboard the pride of the Emperor. Fulgrim's psyche became bound to that image, silently screaming, while the daemon assumed control of his flesh. The Primarch of the Emperor's children was now a puppet in the grip of a Slaaneshi entity. The newly possessed Fulgrim, Daemon Fulgrim, wasted no time in furthering both Horus's war and its own foul designs. After the drop site massacre on Estamen Ford, which ended in a devastating victory for the traitors, the 3 loyalist legions were left all but annihilated, with only a scattered few survivors eventually escaping. Fulgrim's body was retrieved, along with Ferris Minus's severed head. The daemon within Fulgrim was careful to conceal the truth of its possession. To outside eyes, Fulgrim merely seemed colder, more volatile than before. But among such notorious traitors, who would question that? They had all already crossed a Rubicon of atrocity. Fulgrim's first act under demonic control was chilling. The daemon kept Ferris Minus's head as a trophy. When Horus convened a war council soon after the battle, this false Fulgrim presented Ferris's head to the War Master as proof of his loyalty. He had done what Horus demanded. He had slain Ferris. Even though, as the daemon smugly noted, Fulgrim lacked the strength to do it himself, so I did it for him. Horus was immediately alarmed, recognizing that something was terribly off. He realized this being wearing Fulgrim's face was not truly his brother. Confronting it privately, Horus threatened to destroy the demon if any harm came to Fulgrim's soul. The greater demon, however, professed its loyalty to Horus's rebellion, and pointed out that Horus needed the Emperor's Children Legion. At this stage, Horus reluctantly stayed his hand. He figured he would deal with freeing Fulgrim later. There were more pressing battles to win first, so the deception continued. The other Primarchs were not informed that Fulgrim was at that time essentially possessed by a warp entity. Not everyone was fooled for long. During a gathering of the traitor Primarchs, often called the Traitor Conclave, aboard Horus's flagship, Primarch Lars of the Wordbearers, himself deeply versed in demonic matters, sensed the truth. In the middle of the strategy meeting, Lorgar abruptly accused Fulgrim of being an imposter. The bold word-bearer even struck Fulgrim with his mace, knocking the Phoenician across the room. Chaos nearly broke out among the Primarchs as weapons were drawn, but Horus intervened and dismissed the council. Horus privately convinced Lorgar to hold off, admitting he knew Fulgrim was possessed, but promising to handle it. Lorgar was uneasy. He considered this form of uncontrolled possession to be an abhorrent perversion of chaos. Ironically, Lorgar preferred voluntary possession like his Galvorback. He saw Fulgrim's situation as an insult, a demon usurping a Primarch's body against his will. Nonetheless, Horus's will prevailed for the moment, and they let Fulgrim remain in command of the Emperor's Children for the time being, in hopes that after victory they could somehow save the real Fulgrim. Within
the Emperor's Children Legion, the rank-and-file Marines did not realize their Primarch was no longer actually at the helm of his soul. Well, they noticed changes, of course. Fulgrim's behavior became even more erratic, cruel, and capricious than before. But the Legion was already sliding into madness. So many simply took it as further revelation of Selenia's favor. Only a few, like the newly returned Captain Lucius, who had proven his zeal at Eastvon III, found it strange that Fulgrim no longer seemed quite himself. Or when Lucius raised some concerns, Demon Fulgrim rewarded him with a gift. The Lyran blade itself, now an empty shell since the greater demon had vacated it. The demon inside Fulgrim perhaps sensed that Lucius might one day be useful, or at least that giving him a chaos-tainted blade would further corrupt the swordsman's soul. With that, Lucius was placated for the time being, and any nent suspicion about the Primarch's state was quietly smothered under layers of fear and denial. However, the cracks in the facade continued to widen. Shortly after Eastvon V, Horus ordered Fulgrim and the Emperor's Children to assist in a major operation, an assault on Mars, where a civil war raged in the Mechanicum between those loyal to Terra and those siding with Horus. The Emperor's Children, as part of Horus's plan, were supposed to support the traitor Mechanicum forces, but Demon Fulgrim had other ideas. In flagrant disobedience of orders, Fulgrim diverted his legion to a different target altogether: the prismatically glassed world of Prismatica 5, a backwater world with unique crystalline resources. Lord Commander Eidolon, one of Fulgrim's top officers, known for his arrogance equal to Fulgrim's own, dared to question this change of plans. It proved to be the last mistake Eidolon ever made in this life, at least. Daemon Fulgrim, in a paranoid rage, took Eidolon's questioning as a personal insult and a threat. Without warning, the Primarch slashed out with an Aeon, a chaos-tainted dagger Horus had gifted him earlier, decapitating Eidolon in a single stroke. To the astonishment of the Legion's gathered captains, Fulgrim then lifted Eidolon's severed head and casually inverted it over a cask of rare wine. Blood dripped from the head's neck into the wine, mingling with the vintage. Fulgrim toasted to Selene and forced his officers to drink from the blood wine concoction. This grisly ritual was meant to signify who knows what, perhaps that Selene favored the bold and punished the hesitant. Far from being horrified, the Emperor's children in her circle took this in stride. In fact, many despised Eidolon and saw his execution as long overdue. The ever-ambitious Lucius certainly didn't mind. One less Lord Commander meant a faster path to glory for him.
But what Fulgrim's sons did note was that their Primarch's temper had become terrifying and unpredictable. He swung between grandiose mania and murderous fury with little provocation. This chain of events sparked something important. Lucius and a few other officers began to doubt that the being leading them was truly the Fulgrim. They knew Lucius in particular started piecing it together. The uncharacteristic mood swings, the psychic powers Fulgrim had displayed during the assault on Prismatica's crystal citadels. Fulgrim had openly used sorceress abilities in battle, something he'd never done before. And there was that locked guarded room back on the flagship, Ladanish, the theater, sealed, since the Miravilia rumors circulated of a large portrait of Fulgrim that had been placed there now under guard. Lucius, plagued by recurring nightmares of that painting, grew convinced that something was deeply wrong with his Gene father. In secret, he reached out to those he trusted, or rather those he could manipulate, a cabal of Emperor's Children officers who were part of a warrior lodge called the Brotherhood of the Phoenix. Through careful words, Lucius persuaded them that Fulgrim was possessed by some entity and that for the good of the Legion, they needed to somehow free the Primarch from this influence. It was an audacious and dangerous plan, attempting to subdue a Primarch. But the Emperor's Children had become bold in their excess, and many of these officers also nursed grudges against Fulgrim's recent erratic punishments. Under Lucius's subtle guidance, they hatched a plot to capture Fulgrim and perform an exorcism of sorts. When they sprang their trap, it was a desperate, bloody affair. A group of high-ranking Emperor's Children, including Lucius, First Captain Julius Kesseron, Chief Apothecary Fabius, yes, the notorious Fabius Boy, and others ambushed Fulgrim in his private chambers. It's a testament to how far gone the Legion was that anyone even dared raise a hand against a Primarch Fulgrim, or rather the demon within him was caught off guard, and after a fierce struggle in which several conspirators were maimed or killed, they managed to knock the Primarch unconscious with a specialized toxin delivered by Fabius. They rushed him to the Apothecarian and bound him to a surgical table. What followed was a ghastly exorcism by torture. Believing they had to force the demon out, Lucius and the others took extreme measures. They literally tried to torment the entity into leaving Fulgrim's body. They cut, shocked, and used arcane stimulants, all while shouting for Fulgrim to fight it and expel the intruder. It was an unorthodox and gruesome attempt, to say the least. At first, the possessed Fulgrim just laughed and absorbed the pain. But as the ordeal wore on, something unexpected happened. Fulgrim the Primarch suddenly spoke with his voice, not the demons. He told them to stop. With eerie calm, the bound Primarch began explaining things that made the would-be saviors realize they'd been duped. In a stunning reversal, Fulgrim effortlessly broke free of his restraints. Clearly, he could have at any time. The officers stepped back in shock and confusion. Fulgrim, smiling, revealed the truth. The demon was gone already. He, Fulgrim himself, had expelled it some time ago. Stunned, Lucius and the rest knelt, begging forgiveness. Fulgrim magnanimously pardoned them, saying he appreciated their initiative. After all, they only did what he himself would have done in their place. How had Fulgrim freed himself? As he later explained to Lucius in private, his soul had not been idle while trapped in that prison of a painting. Fulgrim claimed he learned from the experience. The demon's presence had taught him much about the Immaterium. Over some period, possibly during the journey to Prismatica Thief, or before, Fulgrim managed to reverse the possession, swapping places with the demon. The Primarch's soul returned to his body, and the greater demon was locked in the portrait in his stead. If that sounds incredible, remember that the Primarchs were extraordinary beings, and Fulgrim in particular was always a quick study, even in matters of chaos. So by the time Lucius and company confronted him, the real Fulgrim was back in charge, quietly pretending to still be possessed to test the loyalty of his inner circle, and perhaps to justify fully embracing chaos of his own free will. From this point forward, Fulgrim was indeed Fulgrim again, though forever changed. Freed of any alien influence, he was now a true believer in the path of Selenish. He told his assembled sons that his mercurial moods and lack of interest in old Legion traditions was simply the natural evolution of his pursuit of perfection through Selenish. No longer bound by mere human morals, Fulgrim announced he would push the boundaries of sensation and experience further than any being ever had. He had a grand vision for the Emperor's children, to perfect the pursuit of pleasure and pain alike, to explore every extreme of existence. The assault on Prismatica 5, he revealed, had been to secure exotic crystals for building a palace of mirrors on a demon world. A monument to new experiences the Emperor's children under Fulgrim were going to reach enlightenment through excess. One might think after such a revelation, some officers would recoil, but in truth, most of the Emperor's
children were so far gone themselves that they roared in approval. Puck Lucius in particular was actually honored. His gambit had proven his value to Fulgrim. Avita Primarch clearly had orchestrated events to test them, and they had demonstrated both cunning and devotion. With Fulgrim fully himself again, albeit a warped version of himself, the Emperor's Children Legion marched forward along the path of damnation with renewed purpose. Fulgrim's ultimate goal was now within reach, not just to serve Selenish, but to become a demigod of chaos himself. Apotheose, the Serpent's Embrace. In pursuit of this dark apotheose, Fulgrim sought out an alliance with another traitor, Primar Perturabo of the Iron Warriors. Perturabo was a master of siegecraft and a relatively level-headed, brutally pragmatic leader, in many ways the opposite of Fulgrim. However, the two had once been comrades, and Fulgrim knew how to appeal to Perturabo's desires. The Emperor's children rendezvoused with the Iron Warriors. After the massacre at Eastfawn, when the two legions met on the world of Hydra Caudatus, the Iron Warriors put on a grand military parade, showing off their disciplined might. But what emerged from the Third Legion's dropships was a shocking sight. The Emperor's children now appeared as a riot of color and mutation. Their armor was repainted in garish pinks, purples and blacks, studded with gold filigree and spiked accoutrements. Many had physically altered themselves, elongated tongues, extrasensory organs, bizarre limb modifications, all gifts of Selenish or self-inflicted enhancements to heighten sensation. They marched not in silence or simple cadence, but often accompanied by strange music or hysterical laughter. The contrast with the stoic Iron Warriors was stark. Perturabo was uneasy at what his brother had become, but he heard Fulgrim out. Fulgrim came with an offer. Perturabo could not easily refuse. He spoke of a weapon of unimaginable power hidden on a faraway Alari, crone world deep within the Eye of Terror. The weapon known as the Angel Exterminatus. This weapon, Fulgrim claimed, could tip the balance of the war and ensure Horus's victory. In truth, the Angel Exterminatus was a lie, or at least not what Perturabo thought. Fulgrim's true plan was to use Perturabo and his Iron Warriors as unwitting tools to achieve his own ascension to demonhood. Perturabo, skeptical but intrigued, agreed to join Fulgrim on this expedition into the Eye of Terror, the warped region of space, home of demons that had opened during the heresy. After all, Horus had sanctioned a temporary diversion for some of his forces, and Perturabo thought perhaps this secret weapon quest could indeed aid the war effort. At the very least, he reasoned, staying on Fulgrim's good side until he learned what was going on was prudent. Thus the Iron Warriors and Emperor's children entered the Eye of Terror together, bound for the crone world Idris, where the Angel Exterminatus supposedly lay. They were not entirely unopposed. Unbeknownst to them, a ragtag band of loyalist survivors from Mistfawn 5's, Iron Hands, Raven Guard and Salamanders, aboard a ship called the Sisophium, had learned of Fulgrim's plan and followed them, determined to sabotage whatever evil the traitors were up to. These loyalists lurked in the shadows, awaiting their chance. On Idris, Fulgrim led Perturabo to an ancient elder structure, a grand cephala deep within a mountain guarded by arcane traps and constructs which the two legions had to overcome. All the while, Fulgrim played the gracious ally, flattering Perabo and indulging his love of puzzles by letting him take charge of dismantling the Eldar defenses. Privately, Fulgrim prepared the next stage of his scheme. He had acquired a cursed artifact, a jade-like crystal called a Mojitar stone, nicknamed the Harvester. In a gesture of false camaraderie, Fulgrim had earlier presented Perturabo with a splendid cloak, the clasp of which was set with this large dark gemstone. As they delved deeper into the Eldar ruins, that stone slowly drained Perturabo's strength and life force, siphoning it into itself unbeknownst to the Lord of Iron. Perturabo, a logical and methodical primarch, did feel increasingly fatigued the farther they went, but attributed it to the strange atmosphere of the Eye of Terror, or lingering elder hexes. Finally, the expedition reached the heart of the Cephala, a great chamber seething with warp energy. There was no Angel Exterminator super weapon. Instead, Fulgrim revealed the truth to Perturabo at the last moment. He was the Angel Exterminatus. In other words, Fulgrim's plan was to ascend to become a demon prince, an immortal demonical being right there and then, using Perturabo's stolen life energy and the power nexus of the Eldar Cone world to fuel the transformation. Perturabo was outraged at this grand deception. He spat that Fulgrim's narcissism had reached cosmic levels. The Iron Warrior's Primarch, though weakened, immediately attacked Fulgrim in fury, swinging the great hammer forge breaker. A fierce duel erupted amidst the roaring warp energies of the chamber, but Perturabo, already drained by the Margotar stone, could not maintain his usual prowess. Fulgrim spoke a single word of power, some dark syllable taught by Silenish, which sent Perturabo reeling in agony. At this point, Fulgrim's ascension ritual commenced. The stolen vitality from Perturabo, combined with the concentrated psychic energy of countless elder souls bound to that crone world, began to elevate Fulgrim beyond mortal limits. A beam of sickly light engulfed him as he started to rise into the air. Seeing this, Perturabo mustered his strength for one desperate move. He tore the glowing Margotar stone from his cloak clasp, now realizing it was the parasite sucking his life, and hurled it away, denying Fulgrim that last portion of his soul. Staggering, Perturabo attempted to stop the process by force. At that very moment, the Loyalist Trike team made their move as well. Iron Hands and others burst into the chamber, firing on emperors, children, and Iron Warrior troops alike. Chaos erupted as a three-way battle began. Loyalists versus traitors versus other traitors. In the center, Fulgrim hung suspended, drawing in power. Perturabo, enraged in seeing his chance, lunged and struck Fulgrim with Forgreaker at full strength. The hammer blow killed Fulgrim's mortal body. One could say Perturabo technically struck his brother down in that instant. Fulgrim's physical form was torn apart in an explosion of light and energy. But far from thwarting Fulgrim's plan, this was the final catalyst needed. The death of his human form became the birthream of something new and unholy. The ritual reached its climax. Fulgrim's soul, suffused with the offerings of souls and Primarch life force, transcended the material. In a blinding burst, Fulgrim achieved apotheosis. What emerged from that explosion was Fulgrim, and yet not Fulgrim. His demon prince form coalesced in midair, a nightmare given flesh. Witnesses described it as both magnificent and terrifying. Fulgrim appeared momentarily as he had in his prime, radiantly beautiful, perfect as the day the Emperor made him. But then his form began to change, flowing like molten gold. His lower body elongated and fused into a powerful serpentine tail covered in iridescent scales. Great horns spiraled from his head, and a crown of demon fire breathed his visage. 2 additional arms sprouted from his torso, each brandishing a wicked blade or claw. Feathered wings, or perhaps membranous ones, unfurled from his back. His face kept its ethereal, cruel beauty,
but his eyes were pits of infinite darkness and delight. In essence, Fulgrim had become a greater demon of Silinish in the shape of a serpentine demon prince. The newborn Daemon Primarch let out a shriek, equal parts victory cry and ecstasy that shook the chamber. Perturabo could only watch aghast as his once brother transcended into something utterly inhuman. Fulgrim, in his first act as a demon prince, spoke to Perturabo, not with anger, but oddly with affection. He cryptically promised that they would meet again as
brothers in the future, when Perturabo too would come to understand. With that, Fulgrim began to teleport his Emperor's children, forces, out of the chamber. In one sweeping gesture, fueled by new sorceress might, the Demon Primarch and all his surviving Marines vanished from Idris in a flash of warp energy, escaping the Loyalists and abandoning the Iron Warriors alike. Fulgrim's ascension was complete. He had no further need of this battlefield. In the aftermath, the Loyalist ambushes and Perturbo's Iron Warriors found the Crone world starting to collapse. Fulgrim's apotheose drained or destabilized the ancient Eldar energies that maintained Idris Perturbo, seething at Fulgrim's betrayal, but pragmatic as ever, ordered a retreat. He took his remaining Iron Warriors and even some of the ragged Loyalists, for at that moment the Loyalists were more concerned with survival than fighting, and escaped the planet by the skin of their teeth. In a dramatic coda, Perturbo actually dove into the Eye of Terror's black hole at the planet's core with his flagship to escape the implosion. An insane maneuver that somehow worked, flinging him out elsewhere in the Eye alive. The Loyalist Sisfan also fled. Idris was consumed in a cataclysmic implosion. As the Eldar souls trapped, they were finally freed or devoured. The drop site massacre survivors had partially succeeded. The traitors didn't get a super weapon, but in truth, Fulgrim had achieved something potentially worse: immortality as a demon. With the first of the Primarchs ascending to demonhood, the heresy entered an even darker phase. Fulgrim was now a prince of chaos, effectively unkillable by conventional means, and endowed with immense psychic and physical power. He became the very embodiment of Sesnish's excess, a 6 m-long serpentine fiend of exquisite beauty and deadly might. However, ascension came with a price. Fulgrim's motives became increasingly alien. Mortal affairs mattered less to him now. The long great game of chaos, the pursuit of ever greater excess in the warp beckoned. Indeed, after achieving demonhood, Fulgrim's direct involvement in the Horus heresy began to wane. He did make a few appearances. At Horus's summons, Fulgrim showed up, now in shimmering demonic form, at battles like the Battle of Dwell, to assist. It's recorded that at one point, he survived an assassination attempt by Iron Hands led by Shadrach Medicine, showing off his new psychic abilities to swat down attack craft. And Horus tasked Fulgrim with an important diplomatic mission, corrupting the human leadership of House Divine, a night house to chaos, which Fulgrim achieved by tempting them into debauchery and pacts. This was in preparation for a later battle on Molech. But overall, Fulgrim's interest in the heresy waned as he became engrossed in the pleasures and intrigues of the warp. He started to consider the long-term millennial scale, rather than the immediate war at Terra. In practical terms, Fulgrim's departure from the front lines had a destabilizing effect on the Emperor's children. Their Primarch, now a Sesnishi demigod, was often absent, indulging in his own bizarre pursuits on a demon world. He claimed for himself. The Legion, already given to individualistic excess, began to splinter without his constant leadership. While Horus still nominally commanded all traitor forces, the Emperor's children became increasingly erratic in their deployments. They fought at Terra, yes, but often in their own way, according to their own whims, as we'll see. Fulgrim ascended, and the Emperor's Children Legion began to devolve into a collection of warlords, each seeking their own twisted glory. Siege of Terra, the Emperor's Children's excesses. When Horus finally launched the assault on Terra itself, the Emperor's children were very much present. but their role was unique and horrifying. Terra, the throne world, became the site of the ultimate confrontation between traitor and loyalist. As the traitor legions bombarded the defenses and laid siege to the imperial palace, the Emperor's children found themselves somewhat at odds with the grinding attritional nature of siege warfare. Patience and methodical planning were never Fulgrim's strong suits, and with Fulgrim himself frequently slipping in and out of the warp in serpentine form, the legion's focus drifted. They became bored with bombarding walls and digging trenches. So instead of concentrating on the daunting task of breaching Rogel Dawn's palace fortifications, the Emperor's children turned to easier prey, the civilian population of Terra. Once the traitors managed to make planet fall and spread their forces, large swaths of Terra surface, hab blocks, hives, spires far from the palace were left effectively undefended. The loyalists were all concentrated around the palace and certain key sites. Into these teeming cities, Fulgrim unleashed his legion like a pack of ravenous, depraved predators. What followed is perhaps one of the darkest chapters of the siege. The Emperor's children embarked on an orgy of destruction and cruelty across the helpless districts of Terra. They didn't bother taking formal control or capturing infrastructure. These were raids of pure indulgence. They rounded up tens of millions of innocent men and women and subjected them to unimaginable torments. Where once Emperor's children apothecaries had healed and tended their brothers, now the legion's chemics and chirurgeons, led by twisted figures like Fabius, set up nightmare workshops. Millions of Terran civilians were butchered in the name of creating new stimulants and drugs distilled from human nervous systems and organs to feed the legion's addictions. Other thousands of captives were corralled into makeshift arenas where Emperor's children, Marines, and summoned Seleneshi demons took turns, seeing who could elicit the most extreme screams, whether of pain or perverse pleasure, from their victims. They performed symphonies of screams, entire symphonic arrangements of murder. Some heretics modified victims into living musical instruments, stretching vocal cords to produce interesting notes when tortured. Daemonettes pranced through the crowds of captives, slicing limbs and tickling nerve endings with equal glee. The Marines themselves competed in devising the most novel sensations, from deafening sonic blasts that burst organs to caresses with blades so sharp the pain was exquisite. For the Emperor's children, this was the ultimate playground. Freed from any restraint on the throne world of man itself, they could finally show everyone just how refined their pursuit of excess had become. It's estimated that the Emperor's children murdered or otherwise caused the death of many times their own number in civilians. By some accounts, over 40 times their number during the siege. Remember, at this point, their number might have been tens of thousands of Marines. So multiply that by 40. We're talking hundreds of thousands or even millions of people slaughtered by them directly, not even counting those killed indirectly by the terror and chaos they spread. And they didn't just kill, they destroyed souls. Reports from after the siege speak of entire hives where the population was found in states of maddened debauchery or catatonic horror. Those few survivors begging for death after what they'd experienced at the Third Legion's hands. In many cases, survivors simply vanished. Tens of thousands taken as slaves back to the traitor ships, destined for an even worse fate in the Eye of Terror, as playthings of the Legion. Fulgrim, as a demon prince, personally oversaw these atrocities with glee. If there was any twisted logic, he framed it as liberating these people from the false morals of the Emperor, pushing them to experience sensation beyond mortal limits. Though of course it just killed or broke them. In his warped mind, perhaps he thought he was doing them a favor, giving them a final moment of perfection through pain and ecstasy. Most sane observers would call it what it was: sheer sadistic carnage and carnality on a scale rarely seen. Horrors had effectively given Fulgrim free rein, and the Emperor's children took full advantage. While other traitor legions were locked in bloody, hard-fought battles against loyalist defenses, the Emperor's children were throwing the galaxy's most horrid party, across Terra's undefended zones. Eventually, as we know, Horus's rebellion failed. The siege ended when Horus faced the Emperor in final battle aboard his ship and was slain at terrible cost. The Emperor was mortally wounded and would soon be interred in the Golden Throne, ending the heresy, but at great price. When Horus fell, the cohesion of the traitor forces disintegrated. Chaos Space Marines began to withdraw in haste, racing to escape Terra. As the vengeful loyalist reinforcements closed in, the Emperor's children, reveling in their bloody rampage, were caught somewhat off guard by the abrupt end of the war. But when they realized their war master was dead and defeat at hand, they too pulled out, gathering whatever plunder and slaves they could carry. Fulgrim, likely sensing through the warp that Horus had perished, did not tarry. The demon Primarch had no intention of facing the loyalists without Horus's leadership. The Emperor's children fleets blasted off, leaving Terra's skies and making for the safety of the warp. The retreat was not exactly orderly. The Emperor's children left scorched earth behind them. In their flight, they butchered any remaining captives they couldn't take along. Worlds along their escape route were mercilessly raided for supplies and slaves to replenish their lost stock. It's yet that Imperial pursuers following the path of the fleeing Third Legion found entire planets turned into abattoirs. On some corpses were piled in mountains arranged in obscene displays that only the twisted minds of Slaaneshi devotees could conceive. On others, the survivors were so traumatized that they begged for death, or were reduced to gibbering wrecks. Their minds shattered by what they had been forced to witness and endure, and in a few cases, the Emperor's children left behind empty cities. Not a single soul remaining, the entire population carted off. Those unfortunates would envy the dead, for they were taken to serve as stock for the Legion's future excesses. The Great Scouring, Vengeance and Flight. The period immediately after the Horus heresy is known as the Great Scouring, when the loyalist forces, reeling from the brink of defeat, rallied and struck back hard at the traitors. The Emperor's children were prime targets for retribution. Weakened by their own indulgences and the losses of Terra, they nevertheless were still dangerous cornered animals. As the Imperium purged traitor presence from world after world, the Emperor's children led a swath of Terra across the stars in a desperate attempt to escape. They set course for the only haven left to them, the turbulent immaterium of the Eye of Terror, where the Imperial Navy and armies would hesitate to follow. During the scouring, there were notable clashes. One particularly fateful encounter came in 1213 at the Battle of Thala. There, the Ultramarines Primarch, Robot Guilliman, intercepted a large Emperor's Children warband, led by none other than Fulgrim himself, who had temporarily reappeared in real space. Guilliman sought to bring his fallen brother to justice for all the atrocities committed. In the void above Thala, the two Primarchs engaged in single combat. Now Guilliman was one of the greatest champions of the Imperium, but even he was at a disadvantage facing a demon Primarch imbued with chaos gifts. Fulgrim, cunning and enhanced by Slaanesh, feigned and struck with supernatural speed. He wielded a invis weak point, Guilliman's throat, which bore an old scar from a previous battle. In a flash, Fulgrim's poisoned sword cut Guilliman's neck open, delivering a toxin laced with warp energy. The Ultramarines Primarch collapsed, mortally wounded, and his body seizing up from the demonic poison. Fulgrim could have finished him off, but at that moment, Ultramarines' reinforcements swarmed in and pulled their Primarch's body away. Fulgrim, not particularly interested in a protracted fight, allowed them to retreat. Guilliman was placed into a stasis field by his chapter, preserving him on the edge of death, where he would remain for 10,000 years until his resurrection in the 41st millennium, an event Fulgrim apparently sensed through the warp. But we'll come to that. For the Emperor's children, wounding Guilliman was a last spiteful victory on their way out the door of history stage. After Thala, the Emperor's children continued to flee toward the Eye of Terror, leaving a trail of depopulated worlds and nightmares. By this point, Imperial forces had largely broken up into fleets chasing various traitor elements. The Sons of Horus, Horus's own legion, and other traitor legions were also in disarray. The Emperor's children managed to reach the Eye of Terror relatively intact, but they carried with them an immense cargo of human slaves and plunder from their campaigns. On arrival in the Eye, a region where normal reality gives way to demon worlds and madness, the Emperor's children quickly set up hidden bases on demon worlds that Slaanesh granted them. Fulgrim, as a demon prince, vanished into the shifting madness of the warp to claim his own personal realm, a palace of endless pleasure and pain. If the rumors are true, often said to be on a demon world he named Kalax after the capital city of Kimis, a dark mirror of the paradise he once tried to build in the Mortarion. With Fulgrim seldom present, the Legion's unified command structure began to fray badly. Worse still, for them, the Emperor's children's insatiable appetites soon led to conflict with their fellow traitors. In the Eye of Terror, the traitor legions licked their wounds and squabbled over resources. The Emperor's children, having brought many slaves from Terra, burned through those lives at a prodigious rate. Their new demonic patrons' demands could never be sated for long. When they started running low on victims to sacrifice, the Emperor's children did what came naturally. They went hunting, but in the Eye, the only prey available were often the other traitor legion's own slaves and territories. And so, the Legion Wars or Slave Wars erupted. The Emperor's children launched raids against the Word-bearers, the Iron Warriors, even their former close allies, the Sons of Horus, to steal stockpiles of humans and resources. This did not go unanswered. The other legions retaliated fiercely. For instance, the Emperor's children had a vicious feud with the World Eaters, Khorne's legion, that culminated on the demon world of Skelethrax. In that brutal battle, the World Eaters, led by the frenzied champion Konda the Betrayer, fought the Emperor's children amid a frozen city. The violence escalated until Konda, in a fit of insane rage, set the city ablaze and began killing friend and foe alike. The result was the World Eaters fracturing into warbands just as the Emperor's children were doing, but not before the Emperor's children had been driven off-world badly mauled. Another notorious incident was the Emperor's children assault on the fortress of the Sons of Horus on the demon world of Myleum. This was an attempt not just at theft, but a twisted project by Fabius Bile, the former chief apothecary of the Emperor's children. Bile, ever pursuing his grotesque experiments, had recovered cells and genetic material from the deceased War Master Horus. In a stroke of hubris and bizarre logic, Fabius decided to clone Horus, perhaps hoping to create a puppet War Master, or simply to prove he could. When the Emperor's children attacked the Sons of Horus fortress, they actually succeeded in seizing Horus's corpse, or remnants of it. In Bile's hidden laboratories, a clone of Horus was grown. For a brief moment, a perfect replica of the dead War Master drew breath, but it was an abomination in the eyes of many. When the other traitor legions learned of this, they were furious, none more than Horus's own legion. Led now by First Captain Ezekiel Abaddon, Abaddon and his elite struck against the Emperor's children with unbridled wrath. They smashed Fabius's facilities, slaughtered the Emperor's children guarding the clone,
and destroyed the Horus clone. Some say Abaddon himself cut it down, cementing his resolve that Horus's legacy was a failure. Abaddon then took Horus's true remains and incinerated them to prevent any further cloning attempts. In the ashes of that confrontation, Abaddon declared himself the new leader of Horus's legion, which he renamed the Black Legion, casting aside the name Sons of Horus. The Emperor's children, on the losing end of that fight, retreated, chastened. Fabius Bile survived, but his act had earned the Third Legion even more enmity from their peers. All these conflicts, the slave wars, ultimately proved disastrous for the Emperor's children. Once a proud legion, they were hammered into pieces. Their fortress monasteries in the Eye were overrun or destroyed by rival chaos forces. Their numbers, already reduced from the heresy, were further thinned by this internecine warfare. Eventually, the Emperor's children effectively ceased to exist as a cohesive legion. They fragmented entirely into dozens, if not hundreds, of autonomous war bands, each led by whoever could claw their way to the top. Be it a Chaos Lord, a champion like Lucius, or a demagogue like Fabius, unity was lost, and in truth, it has never been regained. Seleucus's ethos of personal gratification and self-indulgence isn't exactly conducive to military discipline or large-scale coordination. The Emperor's children became quintessential heretic, astarte war bands, roaming the Eye of Terror, and occasionally raiding real space for slaves, sensory artifacts, and sadistic entertainment. Rumors even spread among other traitors that Fulgrim himself had been killed during these post-heresy struggles. Some tales claimed that Aberdeen and his Black Legion managed to corner Fulgrim on a demon world and banish him, a temporary inconvenience for a demon prince, but still a humiliation. The Emperor's children deny this vehemently, insisting their Primarch lives on as a prince of chaos, reigning over a hidden paradise of excess gifted by Seleucus. In any case, Fulgrim did vanish for thousands of years from mortal sight, likely range in his demonhood in the Mortarion. As the dust settled after the scouring, the Imperium transitioned into the long Dao vigilance of the 41st millennium, and the Emperor's children lingered in the shadows, shattered, but not extinct. Seleucus's chosen 10,000 years of excess. In the 10 millennia since the heresy, the Emperor's children have never been restored to their former legion glory. How could they be when their very philosophy now rebels against unity and order? Instead, they exist as scattered war bands and depraved hosts that emerge from the Eye of Terror, and later from the galaxy-spanning warp rift of the Secretrix Maledictum. To plague the Imperium, each war band is its own miniature army, usually bearing colorful, often garish heraldry, and names that reflect their obsession with perfection or sensation. Names like the Flawless Host, the Symphony of Pain, the Thrice Perfect, and so on. Some war bands still honor the Emperor's children name, painting the old Palatine Aquila on their armor, and viewing themselves as the true inheritors of Fulgrim's vision, just with chaos's twist. Others have spun off into bizarre cult-like sects almost unrecognizable from their legion origins. Fulgrim himself as a demon Primarch resides in the warp and is venerated by all Emperor's children to various degrees, even if he's absent. It's said he rules a demon world of pleasure beyond mortal comprehension, a planet of endless luxurious palaces, mirror maze halls and gardens, where captive souls eternally scream in ecstasy and agony. From time to time, Fulgrim does deign to enter real space again. Being a demon, he can only do so when the conditions are favorable, or by possessing a specially prepared host or cult. But when he does appear, it is an event of galactic note. For instance, in recent years after the birth of the Great Rift, rumors tell of Fulgrim taking part in certain raids, personally, accompanying his favored warbands to slake his thirst for new experiences in the fresh canvas of the Imperium Nihilus, the Imperium sundered half, drowning in warp storms. The Imperial News Service has logged one terrifying account from an outpost in the Nagman Gauntlet, describing a gigantic serpent diamond with a face of eerie beauty leading an assault, an entity identified by scholars as Fulgrim Reborn. Whether mere rumor or truth, it sends shudders through the High Lords to think that more demon Primarchs might return to active battle. Gilman's recent rebirth as the Imperial Regent is perhaps a counterbalance, but Fulgrim has a deeply personal interest in his Ultramarine brother's fate. In fact, upon Rob Guilliman's resurrection in Men 41, an event involving the Eladar and the new Inari sect, Fulgrim psychically projected himself via possession through a servant to taunt Gilman at his grand reappearance on the crag. Fulgrim's message was ominous, warning Guilliman that he too could easily fall to temptation and pride. It was as if Fulgrim could not resist trying to drag his brother down the path he'd walked. Among the mortal champions of the Emperor's children, a few figures stand out over these millennia. Lucius the Eternal, the swordsman who betrayed Saul Tarvitz, went on to become one of Selenish's most favored mortal champions. Lucius's vanity and dueling skills pleased the Prince of Pleasure so much that Selenish granted him a twisted form of immortality. The curse of Lucius is this: should anyone ever strike Lucius down in battle, and revel even for an instant in the satisfaction of victory, Lucius's soul will consume that person. The victor slowly and agonizingly transforms, their body warping until Lucius emerges alive and whole once more, and the poor opponent's soul is trapped in Lucius's ornate armor, their screaming faces visible as part of its designs. The only way to truly kill Lucius would be for someone to defeat him without feeling even a hint of pride or pleasure, a virtually impossible feat for any warrior. Thus, Lucius has cheated death again and again over the centuries. He actively seeks out the greatest warriors of the galaxy simply to prolong his existence and delight in slaughter captains, champions. Even chapter masters have fallen to his blade, only to ensure his resurrection. In between wars, Lucius craves ever more decadent duels. He's as much a danger to fellow traitors as to the Imperium. He's been known to challenge allied champions simply because he was bored, but his presence in battle is truly terrifying. A laughing, unkillable duelist who can slice through Terminator armor with his razor-sharp demon sword and barbed whip, all while feeling ecstatic in the heat of combat. Many an Imperial hero's last sight has been Lucius's unnervingly scarred face. Scarred because those faces on his armor sometimes migrate to his flesh. Lucius currently roams from warband to warband, never content to serve under any one master for long, unless it promises him truly worthy foes to fight. He has fought alongside Abdon's Black Crusades occasionally since those offer plentiful battles, but he's just as likely to go off on his own murderous tangents. There's a darkly humorous saying among some Imperial commanders: if you meet Lucius the Eternal on the battlefield, try very hard not to enjoy the fight. Fabius Bill, the former chief apothecary of the Emperor's children, Fabius, sometimes derisively called the Clone Lord or Primogenitor, took the Legion's pursuit of perfection into the laboratory. Horrified by how far his brothers fell into mindless success, Bill set himself apart, pursuing what he saw as the true path: biological perfection. In practice, this meant grotesque experiments on captives, creating new chimeric life forms, distilling potent combat drugs, and trying to enhance space marine physiology beyond its natural limits. Bill essentially became a mad scientist figure, and over the millennia, he's operated as a free agent. More than a loyal member of the Legion, he has created entire armies of vat-grown mutants and modified warriors, the new men, as he envisions the next evolution of humanity. He is infamous for the Horus clone
incident and numerous other atrocities, including experimenting on his own comrades. In one grim episode, Bile actually developed a method to mass-reduce new artists from corrupted gene seed, which he provided to various warbands. For a price, of course, often willing subjects for further experiments. In a cruel twist, he also suffers from a degenerative disease due to the blight and all the poisonous substances he's handled, necessitating that he periodically clone himself a new body and transfer his consciousness to it. Thus, even Fabius's existence is a cycle of death and rebirth by his own hand. Notably, Bile has few friends, even among traitors. The Emperor's children warbands alternately seek him for his expertise and tried to kill him for his betrayals. He famously parted ways with Eidolon and others, going fully solo to pursue his grand work. If the Emperor's children collectively have anything like an ideological legacy beyond hedonism,
It might be Fabius's twisted creed of forcing humanity to evolve in his mind, beyond the Emperor's design. For now, he remains a fringe player, extremely dangerous, but often focused on his own agendas, popping up in unexpected places to harvest genetic material. Loyalist, chapter gene seed, alien DNA, etc. for his creations. He is careful never to become a customer of his own product, so to speak, rarely indulging in the drugs or modifications he gives others unless necessary. Instead, he clings to a vision of cold perfection through science, ironically, making him one of the less overtly deplorable Emperor's children. Though his callous cruelty is second to none. Eidolon, the vain-glorious Lord Commander Eidolon, once Fulgrim's pride before the heresy, met a grisly end at Fulgrim's own hands during the war. However, death is often just a setback for Chaos servants. Sometime after the heresy, Fabius Bile recovered Eidolon's corpse, and either at Fulgrim's command or out of his own dark curiosity, resurrected Eidolon through extensive surgery and arcane science. The reborn Eidolon was now enhanced with sonic shriek implants in his throat, a gift from Bile, making his voice a weapon that could shatter minds and bone. Eidolon returned to lead a large Emperor's Children warband in the Legion Wars and beyond. His personality remained as pompous and brutal as ever. He and Lucius had an ongoing rivalry. Indeed, Lucius eventually killed Eidolon in single combat at one point. But since Eidolon likely took some satisfaction in the fight, Lucius's curse triggered, and Eidolon was the one who actually died for good, replaced by Lucius. An ironic end if that's truly what happened. Other accounts say Eidolon still leads a host of Emperor's Children even in the 41st millennium, commanding raids and appearing in battles such as the fall of various hive worlds to cults. If he lives, Eidolon is essentially a Chaos Lord of the Old Legion, a prideful figure demanding absolute obedience and continuing the grand decadent war as if nothing's changed, save that he no longer has Fulgrim's oversight and thus indulges every whim. Other notables: there are many other characters from the Legion's past and present one could mention. Julius Caesarum, the first captain during the heresy, went on to lead the warband called the Cleaved, and became a demon prince himself eventually. According to some sources, Marius Viserion, the first noise marine, continued to perfect the art of sonic warfare and spread it among the Legion's warbands until his eventual demise at Loyalist hands. The Legion also fielded unique units, like the Phoenix Guard, Fulgrim's pre-heresy elite guard, some of whom became twisted champions afterward, and the Palatine Blades, duelist cadres, who now roam as Selensi Blade cults. Warband names like the Flawless Blades, Thermic Lash, or Chorus of Pain dot the records of Imperial Inquisitors investigating Chaos incursions, each one a fragment of the Shattered Legion, making its own dark mark on the galaxy. In terms of their warfare in the present era, Emperor's Children forces typically specialize in close combat and shock assault, but always with a sick twist. They employ noise marines heavily, squads armed with sonic blasters, doom sirens, and other weapons that emit devastating waves of sound and psychoacoustic agony. On the tabletop or battlefield, the eerie kinning of these weapons is often the first warning of an Emperor's Children raid, followed by the screams of their victims, which regrettably the Emperor's Children consider to be part of the music. They also make liberal use of combat drugs known as stims or spurs among the traitors. These can heighten reflexes, dull pain, or induce berserker rages, though with unpredictable side effects. Many an Emperor's Children, Mortarion, has literally fought himself to death in a blaze of chemically induced overstimulation, sensations overloading until organs rupture. But in their insane creed, that's seen as an honorable way to go. Drowning in excess, demonettes and other Selensi demons are frequently summoned to fight alongside them,
turning battlefields into surreal carnivals of violence. Imagine elegant live demon forms dancing through bolter fire, giggling as they eviscerate soldiers, all while Marines in Baroque gold, chased armor march forward behind them, blasting apart tanks with sonic waves that cause metal to split like overstressed glass. It's war as performance art, for a very depraved definition of art. Some imperial scholars have noted with grudging concern that Emperor's Children warbands have a terrifying tendency to corrupt those they fight. Guard units or PDF that face them and survive often report strange temptations and psychological disturbances afterward, as if the hedonistic aura of the Legion leaves a psychic residue. Selene C's lore is very real. The more you expose yourself to its emanations, the more you might start to enjoy things you really shouldn't. The Emperor's Children weaponize this effect, sometimes defeating foes without firing a shot by spreading chaos, cultism ahead of their invasions. Many a pleasure cult on imperial worlds, offering forbidden joys and sensations, has turned out to be a front for Emperor's Children recruitment, softening up a planet from within before the knives come out. The Long War and recent times. For 10,000 years, the Emperor's Children and their splinter groups have perpetuated their long war against the Imperium in their own peculiar fashion. While Abaddon the Despoiler rallied the Black Legion and many other traitor remnants for numerous Black Crusades, the Emperor's Children's participation was inconsistent. Some warbands joined the fray, lured by promises of unlimited slaves or exotic treasures. Lucius notably has fought under Abaddon's command during the 13th Black Crusade around Cardia, because where else could he find as many worthy opponents? Other emperors, children lords, however, couldn't be bothered to take orders or stick to someone else's grand strategy. Many sat out major conflicts if it didn't suit their personal agenda. Infighting between Emperor's Children factions or between them and other Selene C's worshipping groups like certain chaos cults has further reduced their prominence on the galactic stage. They are not extinct by any means, just unpredictable. However, events of the last few centuries have given them new opportunities. The opening of the Great Rift, Cicatrix Maledictum, in mid-A42, split the galaxy in half with a massive warp storm. In the turmoil, many chaos forces surged forth in all directions, taking advantage of weakened imperial defenses and temporal spatial anomalies. Emperor's Children warbands were among these, spilling into real space to indulge in the widespread chaos. No pun intended. Worlds that had never known the touch of the Phoenician sun suddenly found themselves under assault by bizarre sadistic warriors. There are reports from the Vigilus campaign, a recent focal war zone of an Emperor's Children faction called the Flawless Host, causing absolute terror in the hives, dueling ultramarines in the streets, while blasting choir hymns of chaos through on loudspeakers on the eastern fringe. A warband led by a self-styled perfect prince tried to engineer a demonulaba, some vile birthing process for new chaos spawn that was fortunately stopped by the Death Watch. Each warband pursues its own mad dream of perfection, but collectively they remind the galaxy that the Emperor's Children are still very much a threat. Fulgrim, as mentioned, has shown signs of renewed interest in mortal affairs. When Guilliman was resurrected, Fulgrim saw a sort of challenge. How delicious would it be to corrupt the avenging sun, just as he himself fell? The possessed messenger he used to speak at Guilliman's inauguration was a clear shot across the bow. Now, with Guilliman leading the Imperium's indomitous crusade to reclaim worlds lost to the Great Rift, one wonders if a confrontation between the Phoenician and the avenging sun is fated. Guilliman is essentially the last loyal Primarch active. If Fulgrim could drag him down or kill him, it would be a grotesque echo of Fulgrim's own murder of Ferrus Manos. On the other hand, Guilliman surely seeks to avenge his fallen brothers and has not forgotten the role Fulgrim played in shattering the Imperium's dream. In the shadows of the warp,
Fulgrim coils, perhaps preparing for the moment to strike when Gilman's crusade is at its most extended. Of course, planning aside, Fulgrim's not exactly a patient schemer like some of his brothers, say Alfarius or Logar. If he comes, it might be in a sudden blaze of decadent fury rather than a carefully timed strategy. Some imperial tarot readings and heretical prophecies even suggest Fulgrim will make a grand choral arrival, possibly meaning a large Kale Emperor's Children incursion, accompanied by some reality-shaking sonic catastrophe. Imagine 1,000,000 souls screaming at once to announce his arrival. The Imperium can only brace itself for that day as they scramble to deal with more immediate threats. One must also mention the strange persistence of the Emperor's Children Legion culture even in small war bands. They still toast to for the Emperor, but now it's a mocking jeer when they charge a sick joke as they know no Emperor awaits them. Only Senesh. They still seek perfection, but now it's perfection in butchery or perfection in debasement. The very name Emperor's Children is an irony so dark it could blot out a sun, yet they cling to it. Perhaps because deep down in some twisted corner of their psyche, they remember what they once were and derive a perverse thrill from defiling it. Conclusion: the saga of the Emperor's Children is a tragic tale of excellence turned to excess, of pride that literally begat a fall, a drop into the depravity of chaos. They were once the paragons of virtue among the Space Marine legions, children of the Emperor in both name and spirit. No legion had further to fall, and fall they did, tumbling from the Emperor's grace into the waiting arms of Senesh. Their story serves as a dire warning. Even the most pure can be corrupted when obsession and hubris take root. Fulgrim and his warriors sought the ultimate perfection, and in chasing it, they lost everything that made them noble, becoming perfect monsters. Today, the Emperor's Children are Senesh's vilest champions, artists of death, connoisseurs of suffering, forever in pursuit of new extremes. They have no empire or strategic goal. Their goal is the pursuit itself, an endless quest to outdo their last atrocity. In battle, they are terrifying, not just for their weaponry, but for their joy. They revel in horrors that would break any sane being, and they won't stop until every sensation in the universe has been exhausted, or until they are finally brought to justice for their countless abominations. In the end, the Emperor's Children achieved a dark sort of perfection. They perfectly embody the corruption of chaos in all its seductive glory and destructive cruelty. Their Primarch sits in a palace of nightmares, a fallen angel laughing at the folly of man, and across the stars, when heart-rending screams echo in the night, and the air throbs with unnatural music, you know that Senesh's perfect warriors have come calling once again. The Emperor's Children, once the pride of the Imperium, now the scourge of the cosmos, are a reminder that in the grim darkness of the far future, the line between heaven and hell is perilously thin. Their story is not merely one of villains and heroes, but of the eternal truth that pride and obsession are doors through which the darkest of evils can enter. And once those doors were opened, the Emperor's Children stepped through forever.